There we go. Recording now. So welcome to the France and Colonies Zoom presentation of June 26, 2022. Mike Bass is going to present on France in the Holy Land. So as before, I will mute everybody, and Mike, you will unmute yourself. And following that, wait a minute, where'd my mute everybody go? We will have a Q&A at the end, and that should pretty much tell us what's going on. So I'm going to present, or I'm going to share my screen. We had a little difficulty with this earlier with Mike's. And here it is. Everybody's, I haven't shared that yet. Sorry.
Have you muted everybody yet?
I have not. I'm trying to get my share screen to come up now. There we go. All right, screen is shared. And I will, it looks, I can't find my little mute everybody button. So what I'm going to do is I will go to a different screen and mute people. And Mike, you can start.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ken. I know you and I are both members of Akron Collectors Club, and you being one of the principals at the France and Colonies asked if I would put something together for this group. I have been a collector of Holy Land since I've been 10 years old, and that has always been my focus. I will make some admissions up front. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call that are much more knowledgeable about French history, French postal history, and I'm always, at the end, I think I put my email address up. If you have any comments or questions that you'd like some follow-up on or to discuss, might be a great appropriate way of talking about it. My exhibit, I should say, there's talk starts during the Napoleonic campaign, which took Napoleon in the late 18th century down into the Middle East. And then we're going to walk through the centuries of France's involvement in the Holy Land through the Ottoman era. We'll talk about World War I, which ended 400 or 500 years of Ottoman control of the region, and wrap it up when Israel became a nation after World War II in 1948. So having said that, next. Most of you are pretty familiar with Napoleon and mail from his forces. Next. I was very fortunate because there are very few letters that were sent from the Middle East during that campaign. I was fortunate to gather this one. This it became such a fascination for me because this particular general sent a letter, which you can see here, after they were defeated by the British and the Ottomans in the Battle of Acre, which is along the coast. And the French were repelled from moving up the Mediterranean coastline. I think Napoleon's real initiatives were to conquer the Middle East, so he'd create kind of a supply chain gateway out to the Far East, which both probably for economic and military reasons. And he ran into a buzzsaw with the British and the French. So this particular letter translates back to Cairo, that we just were beat up out there in Acre and we're limping back home. We're diseased, we're tired, we've got wounded, and make sure that you have some particular resources for us as we come back home. You can see that this was sent to, Leroy, the coordinator of the Mediterranean coast, wrote General Dugas, who was back there in Egypt at the time, concerning the depleted state of the affairs. One comment before we move forward is I did not realize that Napoleon created his own calendar, which you folks are probably much more familiar with than me. And I just found it fascinating as I was working through, this particular piece of folded mail. So you can see it was received in Alexandria, which is the port, and forwarded off to Cairo. Next. This kind of leads us into the 19th century, which is what I call a continuation of the Ottoman era. There was a French consulate mail from the Holy Land, and I just realized this morning I have early mail from consulate pre-1853, which is that gap between Napoleon and this era. But nonetheless, you'll see some of that as we move into this period. 1852, formal postal routes and rates started to occur in this region. And what was interesting is these treaties were negotiated between France and the Ottomans centuries earlier, called the Capitulation Treaties, which allowed the French to operate postal services in the Middle East under the Ottoman rule. And so they could, have access to putting post offices in some of the major cities. And those capitulation treaties from the 1500s is what granted the French the opportunity to put their flag in the Holy Land. Next. This one here is one of my jewels. It is the first French postal office marking, that round Jerusalem 1853 is one of three covers. This one here I really adore. Obviously, it was sent interpostal from Jerusalem to the coast, which is Jaffa port, and off to Paris. And I think that's a 10 decime marking. And you see on the backside, there's some Paris arrivals. It did go through like a packet boat system up the coast. There's a Beirut transit marking there as well. Next. Moving on, different postmarks. This one's 1855, 1857. There's a French Jerusalem straight line, we call it, via Jaffa again, which is the port. And it's marked not post paid, marking to collect the 200 centimes, which is a double rate upon arrival. The top is using the 3768 lozenge cancellation, which most of you are familiar with, and sending single rate to Gibraltar via Jaffa port, Alexandria and Malta. Next. Jaffa straight line on the left side there, back to France, 10 decime single rate. And then on the right, that J. Filbert was the first French consular in the Holy Land, which I'm just going to move this around here, which was a position held for quite some time. And a folded letter posted through Jaffa. Next. Then there was a coach that ran between Jerusalem and Jaffa weekly, and this family had kind of monopolized that for quite some time. This one here is arrival mail coming in, which I really appreciated, 1863. It's I don't know why I must have lost that item on the right side there, but the arrival mail, which you can see was the 12 decime postmark manuscript plus free return delivery. So, but that's from the French postal services into Jaffa from Paris. Next. Again, in 1857, stampless folded letter. This one here was sent to Greece. So I do like to collect 1857 There was a 200 centime double letter rate and a 30 centime inland delivery with a PP postage paid to port into Greece. So I do like the destination mail. And there is a straight line Jerusalem dispatch up on the top right. It's a little hard to see, but it's there nonetheless. Next. Couple of pieces of mail showing Jaffa to Beirut. I do try to segment my collecting based upon regional destination. This is inner Ottoman mail. And this one had the 100 centime single letter rate, 1868. And then the letter rates did change. They decreased it in 1869 to compete with the Ottoman services. As I said earlier, there were a number of nations that had postal operations in the Holy Land: France, Germany, Italy, Russia, Austria were some of the other nations that maintained operations in the Holy Land during this particular Ottoman period. Next. This one here is arrival mail on the left. As you can see, from Beirut to Jaffa, Jerusalem. That upper strike is the Jerusalem Cross as an arrival cancel, quite rare. The 60 centime port-to-port single letter rate, 5 centime inland delivery charge, because it had to get to Jaffa and then over to Jerusalem using that coach service. The one on the right is actually the diplomatic mail. As you can see on the back, they marked it vice consulate from Jaffa, and it was sent to his counterpart, the consulate at the United States consulate in Jaffa as well. 1859, pretty early. Next. Then I also started moving and collecting French mail from the Holy Land to different European destinations. Here's a couple of covers to Holland, in Amsterdam, 1865, 1865, single rate and double rate with all the various transit markings.
It's not Holland, Netherlands.
Next. Like I said, French mail from the Holy Land to European nations. Here's to Italy, 60 decime and the triple rate 180 centime on the right. And I love to, call out the way that the little boats, packet boats around the Mediterranean operated. You can see they were going from port to port to port as they were moving around the Middle East. Jaffa was a major port. Alexandria was a major port. Beirut was a major port as well. Next. Here's to Germany. I like a lot of these dirty covers that have all kinds of markings on them. The one on the left is to Hamburg. Have had a lot of trouble trying to dissect the 13.5 cruiser. As most of you know, there was these inner Germanic rates and treaties that occurred at the time. If anybody has any, deeper knowledge on how that whole system worked in the mid 1800s, I'd be interested. But this one here on the left also was a dispatch with the Jerusalem Cross, French Jerusalem Cross from Jerusalem through Jaffa out up to Germany. The right one here is again inbound mail. Difficult to find this kind of stuff. And it was redirected to Jaffa. It must have been a traveler via the ship Sinai, which was traveling around the Mediterranean at the time. Next. Up to the UK, mail handled by the French postal operations in the Holy Land. And again, I collect Holy Land, so I have a whole, exhibit for German, Italian, Austrian, and such. But today we're obviously just focusing on the French postal services in the Holy Land. Here's one from Jerusalem through Jaffa, Alexandria, all the way up to Scotland. And then, of course, the one on the right is also to the Rothschilds in London. You can see the various 5089 cancel up on the right, another kind of lozenge cancel that they use, and all the requisite different handling markings. Next. More to and from the UK. Here's inbound mail, 1865, 1870. Again, I like to kind of, collect inbound as well, arrival mail as well as outbound. The 6 pence, I think, was equivalent to 60 centimes, which was that letter rate between France and England from the convention. And down below, obviously, from Liverpool all the way to Jerusalem. Next. Then you move into the transatlantic side of things. So we're moving from the Holy Land overseas to the United States. And here's a couple of beautiful covers that tell the story from Jerusalem through Jaffa, all the way through Paris and Liverpool, which most of you recognize was one of the dispatch points over to New York during that particular era. And then on the right, also again from Jaffa, but this one through New York and arriving in Philadelphia, 1857. Next. This is the one on the left is actually one of my favorites. It was my first, I don't know if any of you remember Dr. Al Friedberg. He was a renowned Holy Land philatelist, great guy, my mentor. And he sold me this cover like many decades ago. And if you look at the right Jerusalem cross on this left cover to Boston, you'll notice that the stamp overlays the Jerusalem cross. And I remember him, sitting in his living room telling me the story about how they postmarked it. I was at the time, they put the French cross on in Jerusalem, but then they put the stamps on in Jaffa, which is why it overlays over the particular Jerusalem cross with Jaffa transits, and also off to America, the AM service, which was the boat oversees the transatlantic mail ship. The one on the right, as you see, is to New Jersey, 5089 lozenge cancel, and you can see the various transport cities that this particular cover went through. Next. More French transatlantic mail. Love the morning covers. They really have a certain panache to them, as many of you know. This one here, I really loved it because the stamps were, overlaid and hanging over the top of the cover, and it still stayed intact throughout all these many years. This one going obviously from Jerusalem through the various transit points all the way to Reading, Pennsylvania. Loved it. The one on the right is also to America via a different ship, the Amerique, I guess is how they would pronounce it, and to New Jersey, double weight rate. And of course, there's some of the servicing charges for handling the mail through the different transit points. I don't study the stamps like some of you folks do. I know that just in my travels that some of these stamps are very early French post, and you see that they had drifted into the Holy Land during this particular time frame. Next. Some more transatlantic mail. This one by French packet on the left via Marseille. Again, from Jerusalem through the various transit points, carried packet boat all the way out to San Francisco. So that was quite the journey. And I showed on the back there some of the various transit markings. It's just been a joy to have some of these jewels in my collection. It's taken me, I don't know, something like 50 years to find these, as many of you recognize how difficult it is. There was some postage due on this. You can see it on the front upon arriving in San Francisco. Next. I don't even know how a postal clerk throughout these systems kept track of what fees were due to what stage of the transit. Of course, the UPU period started a whole different rate structure. Here's a couple of postcards sent back to France. You can see the 10 centime rate. These came from, one on the left is from Jerusalem, the one on the right is from Jaffa. And you can, I do collect the markings of the era along with, the destinations and the postal rates, because I try to be a good postal historian. Next. So there's the postcard rate. Here's a printed matter rate, 5 centime on the left and on the right, using, again, different stamps, which I think help really embellish the story of what kind of stamps were being supplied into the Holy Land by the French. Into the Levant. Yep. That's right. Thank you. Next. Couple more printed matter. Again, that morning cover on the left from Jaffa to Marseille. I just really love it. But the BM down on the bottom right of the morning cover was the boat, the Moet mobile boat, which, as most of you know, was a box hung over the side of the ship that people in the area could come and post their mail to. And the one on the right, which is one of my favorites, also is sent out to a U.S. representative in California, and you see the strings attached because somebody put a kind of a package together and sent it off to this particular representative in California. So, next. Official mail, postage due mail, also helps tell the story of France in the Holy Land. The one on the right, also one of my favorites, was sent by the Postal Service itself. What I understand is that they were sent this out to the USA because they were inquiring to see if another piece of registered mail had been received. They hadn't gotten anything back. As you see, they used a registration label on this particular official piece of mail. The one on the right is a postage due from Jerusalem to France with the T marking on it. Next. Another postage due. I'm going to apologize because there was a year-old judge and he passed away. I know he was, many of you know, a postage due collector. Great guy from out west, and he used to always look at this item and express his joy to see it, because as you can see, this one here was sent from the U.S. to Jerusalem with the postage dues on it, and on the back side, you see the T marking as well. This came through Haifa to Jerusalem, and always been one of my favorites. Next. I also like to put into my collection postal forms. Again, these are from the French. The top one is a telegraph receipt from Jaffa, and the bottom was a baggage receipt. Thought that was kind of fun, with the Jerusalem marking on the 10 centime stamp. Next. Some more postal forms and arrival mail. The one on the left there is 18 a little later, and it's what is that? That's from New Haven, Connecticut, in reverse to Paris to Jerusalem, and the one on the right is of Jerusalem to Winnipeg, Canada. Great destination for my Canadian friends, and it shows a postal form receipt. One side note right now, I'd like to say is if anybody, it was such a joy to get up to Capex a couple weeks ago for the Toronto show. It was just spectacular. The Canadians did such a great job. And for those of us who had an opportunity to get up there, it was such a joy to get back to a stamp show. I can tell you, it was just wonderful. This particular postal form, as you see, was dated August 28th, 1914, which is 1 month prior to the post office closure due to the outbreak of World War I. So you can see from Napoleon all the way up to the, August of 1914, there's a long history of France operating under the Ottoman umbrella. Next. Some more arrival mail. This one shows from Paris to Jaffa. That Poste Français Jaffa was used as on arrival mail specifically in Jaffa. And the one on the right is always kind of fun for me because, it's from Brazil to Jerusalem in 1910. I mean, how many letters do you think went from Brazil all the way out to the Holy Land? So it's kind of one of my little fun jewels.
It's to
Next.
a priest.
To a priest, yeah, padre. Next.
Hold on. There we go.
Some more arrival mail. This one from from Marseille to Haifa. You'll notice Haifa, the postmark for Haifa all of a sudden came in during the UPU period. Before that, it was really Jerusalem and Jaffa. And then on the right, there was from Switzerland to Haifa, and they put a 5-cent delivery label, which was applied as a donation to the Jewish National Fund in 1912. It arrived in Haifa, and then it was just hand carried as a service that somebody provided. Next. Some more interpostal, inter-office transfer mail. This is inter-office because they were operating in the Ottoman umbrella. They sometimes cooperated with the Ottomans. For example, on the one on the right, it was Marseille to Haifa. There's a French Haifa Syri cancel. Then they transferred it over to the Acre Ottoman personnel for delivery. And then in reverse here the Jaffa post in Palestine went up into Constantinople. So there was a cooperative between the two post offices. Next. Here's the consulate mail I was describing. Obviously post-free, regional diplomatic mail, free of charge. That's a photograph. I was so lucky somebody gave me a photograph of the French of all the different post offices in the Holy Land many years ago. So I thought I'd just share that. That's the French post office. Next. Another kind of consulate mail. Next. This one here, also consulate mail. From Jerusalem to Marseille, and then it was turned back to Jerusalem. So you see all the wonderful markings on the front and the back. Return to sender. You also see a straight line up on the left there. It's kind of hard to see on this video, but there is a consulate straight line from France marking up on the upper left, free of charge. Next. Same thing, some more 1899 mail from Jerusalem to France. Next. They did adjust some of those consulate postmarks. So anyways, World War I breaks out, and this is, to me, I'm working on this area right now because I have a very large collection of the Allied forces in World War I. As many of you know, the British kind of were protectorate over the Suez Canal, which really was a waterway that linked the Far East, where the British had an awful lot of outposts. And to protect the supply chain, they had military operations in conjunction with the Suez area. 1914 breaks out, and lo and behold, they decided to congregate the Allied forces in Egypt. One of their first military campaigns was up in the Gallipoli, and they hadn't really focused on the Middle East in terms of the Holy Land quite yet until later on, 1915, 1916, after they got beat up pretty bad up at the Gallipoli campaign. But the French, who were up to their eyeballs in their own problems in Europe, as you know, did send some military forces down into the Egyptian area, which I found fascinating. They enjoined themselves with the British, who were the predominant Egyptian expeditionary force, along with the Anzacs, which some of you know that history, and also the Italians sent over some military units. So if you go to the next slide, this is kind of early. I've been accumulating the French military participation in that Egyptian expeditionary force that was attached to the British. And here you see the Armée d'Orient, which really was the French military group that supported the Middle East. Next. Again, kind of early stuff, 1915. They were floating their navy down in that whole Mediterranean area, and they would stop off at the ports, as an example, in Alexandria, and they had their French forces stationed in Alexandria at that time, March 1915. So that was just a few months after the war broke out. Next. 1915, they also were participating. Obviously, they were probably strapped. They didn't provide a whole lot of troops because they were caught up in their own problems in Europe, but they did have some forces in this particular area. As I mentioned earlier, the Ottoman Empire ceased their capitulation operations with France. So now we're just, looking at military mail. The one on the bottom right there, which was mail sent back, as you see, it was hand scribed correspondence military, 1915. That actually went through an Indian post office and censored by the Indian attachment to the British, and off to France it went. Next. Again, 1915 mail, kind of early September of 15, this one at the bottom right, July of 15. I try to track the military campaign by date. I find as the units are moving around, it's fascinating to me to see what they were doing at what particular location on what particular date. Again, the French were there more as I would almost want to use like a token force. They were almost a police force. They weren't really engaged heavily in the campaign. From what I understand, I don't have a piece of mail from the from the aviation, the Air Force, though they did have some operations. That photograph shows that they were flying over the pyramids. I think the bottom cover, I hadn't looked at this in a while, but the bottom cover, I think, is attributable to the French Air Force. Next. Again, this is the Marine, which is the Navy, coming through 1916, showing a postmark from Jaffa. Next. Another postmark from the region, in that it's from the Suez area that the French had some formations located. This was sent from Port Said back to France. Next. More French military mail. That FM up in the top right of the left postcard is for the French military. And so they did, operate obviously a postal service, mostly in conjunction with, you see in this case, Alexandria. That's the civilian mail that they had to use in 1916. I don't think France, they were cooperating. Those Liberty cancels with the Statue of Liberty, you see on the bottom left there, was used to mark French mail. And the same thing applies. This one on the bottom right was from an officer. You can see the manuscript FM as well for French military, and sent with a French marking, their Corps d'Armée, Port Said. Next. Again, a Marine cancel Navy in that particular region, from Port Said, marking back to southern France, 1916. The real fight in the Sinai campaign didn't start until late 16 and really kicked into gear in 1917. So next. The British, and you see from this is a good one, because the DFP marking, which is somewhere up in the manuscript, I believe, was the reorganization of the French in conjunction with the British during this particular time. This is January 1917. It was not quite, the British were just really getting ready to move out of the Suez Canal region and into the Sinai. They started to attack Gaza, which is a port city, as most of you know, in March. There was 3 big battles, Gaza 1 in March, Gaza 2 in April, and then ultimately the British and the Anzacs were successful in conquering Gaza and Beersheba in October of 1917. So you can see that the French really had a participating contingent in this operation, but they were mostly like, sort of peripheral to the main war. Next. That cover there went through the British Army Post Office. Again, the FM in the upper right manuscript was for French military, some dumb markings that were applied through the Port Said Egyptian civilian post off to the DFP. You see it in the address section. 601A was the unit number applied to the French detachment. They were located in Ramla near Alexandria at that particular time, April of 1917. So Gaza 1 had just kicked off, and Gaza 2 was getting ready to be launched by the British. And then this particular detachment, 601A, which was near Alexandria, stayed back in the supply chain. Next. 601 is another marking that was used by the French. This one in May of 1917. Really, things were starting to heat up in the Sinai Palestine campaign. This was sent by the French 601 postal office out to Egypt. And you can see that this was sent from Port Said to Alexandria. The bottom right there, you see transit markings, because at that point, the British base Army Post Office T, and then of course the military in Alexandria marking as well. So this was really handed off amongst various different agencies. I think it's just fascinating to me how they did this during that particular war period. So you see this was dispatched on May 14th in the upper left. And, it really moved around very quickly. I mean, it was one day later, it showed up in Alexandria, which is amazing to me. The 5-point star indicated a military mail handled by the Egyptian postal system, civilians, I might add. So you see on the front there, a 5 star indicating that it was handed off to the civilians. Next, all military, French military. Love this one. Some of you might know Jacob Nakri. I put that certificate in there just some of you do. Great but expensive dealer of mail, and he sold me this many years ago. It's a registered French 601 to Paris with official mail, and just thought this was really great from the war period. July of 1917, as you see, from Port Said. Next. There's another registered manuscript 601 to France. This one, I like to call these the dirty pieces because it has just so much stuff going on in it. It was registered, which of course is the reason for the fee. The Colonel hand stamp, which was, I think, kind of cool with the Liberty marking, and through British transit and were applied. The APO SC 23 was located in the Upper Egyptian area, which is British. The BAPO T was in Port Said through Cairo, and also censored as well. So it was really great piece of French military history located in that particular war zone. June 1917, the British had still not conquered the Sinai. They were, working their way in there, but as I said earlier, they didn't capture Beersheba and Gaza until October. So this is kind of in that middle time frame that I like to, point out. Next. Another August 1917 pre-Gaza 3. This one's marking is 601A, which is another postal mark that they used, and this goes back to France. Next. This December of 1917 French military postcard, which I think is kind of fun from a stationary perspective. This one is pretty late in the war. Again, this was starting to move. The French and the British were moving down now into Palestine as they were working their way across the Sinai and conquering and making entry into Palestine. The Ottomans were in retreat with the Austrians as well as the Germans. They conquered Jerusalem. The British conquered Jerusalem, entered Jerusalem on around December 11th. And so you can see that this was December 17th with another APO 22, which is located in Port Said. So, this is just great mail sent from the French military back to Port Said using both the British as well as the civilian mail on the rival side. Next. This one here is a 601A also marking. It was opened, which is the overt. I'm sorry if I mispronounce my French, but then read by the military authorities and so forth. Ultimately, you can see from the label on the backside, it was Control Postal Militaire, and covered up the marking on the 601A on the front side of this. Next. 1918, mail sent 601A military mail back to France, and it was sent from the French Ambulance 2x2 Brigade. I don't know if I said that right, but some of you understand it. The DFP was the detachment in Palestine. Next. Another 601 cancel, May of 1918, sent to Egypt, which was an encampment where they had prisoners of war and they did training, this Heliopolis area. And you can see that the Liberty marking, and it was opened and censored, and just got a lot of great military stuff on this cover. The bottom left is, you'll notice it was return mail to the 601 location at that particular time. Next. Again, there wasn't a whole lot of, French military forces in the region. Here's an example of on the upper left, in August of 1918, it was sent via the British APO, Army Post Office 44, which is located in Jerusalem, to the 601A detachment, which at that point now located in Jerusalem. I remember I said that the British conquered Jerusalem in December of 1917, but they hadn't really wrapped up their initiatives. They were still moving their way into the Jordan Valley and so forth. So, but at this particular point, the French had operations in Jerusalem with the 601A. The one on the right is some infantry marking, as you can see, using the 601A location as well, back to Paris. I always like to find them when they have manuscript up in the bottom right cover there. They have a 601A, like return address, and I think that that's just so neat to show the actual locations of destinations of the 601 French operations detachments in the Middle East during that time frame. Next. Another 601 dispatched from Jerusalem to Paris in 1918. You can see that it's got a little commercial Notre Dame de France in Jerusalem marking. The one below it is stationary of the YMCA. FM is the French military. They also added a 601B cancellation ultimately, which is the one on the right. A little harder to find, they're kind of rare. And 1918, they participated with the British forces in their final push through the Jordan Valley and on to Damascus. September 1918, as you all know, 11/11 of 18 is Armistice Day. And so this one's kind of getting late in the World War I era. Next. Another registered, very difficult to find. I'm fortunate to have it. And this is a 601 dispatch from Port Said back to the Cyprus, actually. So, just love these, very hard to find these registered military covers from the French detachment in Palestine during World War I. On official French stationery. Next. A little later on, 1920, after the war ended, they still maintained a garrison in Jerusalem, which was still using the 601 marking. At that particular point, the British were setting up civilian post offices in Palestine, but this was obviously continued to use French military markings. The British mandate from the League of Nations, I think, was somewhere in that 1920 particular time frame. Next. The British mandate, really took over managing the postal operations during 1918 through 1948. I don't know of any French mail per se that was used with designated French markings until the interim period in 1948. And in this particular moment in history, as many of you know, we got through World War II, and then in May of 1948, the United Nations declared Israel as a independent nation. But as you'll see in a moment here, that the war broke out immediately around that time in April, and the French consul general in Jerusalem issued a proclamation referencing the authority granted France by the Ottoman Sultan, and went ahead and issued French stamps to use by the French nationals to operate emergency postal services out of Jerusalem at that particular time. Next. And here they are. You'll see a couple of French stamps with French postmarks used at that time as almost emergency mail. May 6th is pretty early. I think it was May 16th is when Israel was declared a nation. And you'll see that in conjunction with the United Nations, there's a couple of markings that were used during this particular interim period. One had overprinted and one did not. You know, you guys know better than I do about these Marianne stamps that were used. Next. Again, there was the consulate in July of 48, which was after Israel was established. They were under siege in Jerusalem. The Arabs encircled Jerusalem and cut them off from the rest of the world. You can see here a consulate mail from Palestine, specifically Jerusalem, carrying mail to France. There was the additional cachet with 2 letters FM. Up in the upper right there, you'll see they were manuscript for French military inserted by hand, posted Jerusalem via the French off to France. And this next, let's see what you got next. Oh, here's an airmail letter, August of 1948 from Jerusalem. You'll notice on this particular stamp, there was a Jerusalem overprint. Again, there was a war that just, was raging in that particular area, but the French consulate wanted to ensure that their nationals would be able to correspond outside of that area. And this one here was sent via airmail with an arrival Paris, August 20th of 1948. Let's see, next one. That's it. That tells a long story from Napoleonic campaign all the way out through the establishment of the State of Israel and how the French maintained postal operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I will leave this up on the screen for a few moments, but it's time to ask questions or make comments. So unmute yourself and join in, please.
Mike, this is Larry. This is Larry Rosenblum. Wait a minute. Sorry. The cover that has the marking of BM, that is for the French words boîte mobile, BOITE, or box mobile. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I described it correctly, that was a box that was hanging off the ship that people could drop the mail into.
Yeah, either hanging on the ship, I guess, or on the dock, or somewhere where it is accessible, yes.
I've gone past it. I was going to try and find
Yeah.
it.
It was during the Ottoman period. Keep going. They're kind of rare from this particular area. Keep going. Right there.
It is. Back
Yep,
one.
keep going. Go back one.
That one.
Yep. The morning cover on the left had the BM in the bottom right corner.
Right.
Thank you.
Any more?
Does anybody have mail? I would ask a question. Does anybody else have any mail from the Holy Land during any of these eras that they can talk about? in their collections. I don't have a corner on all of the French mail from the Holy Land. I can assure everybody of that.
If you permit me a German item, I can show you a German item.
Oh,
Ed
Is that Ed?
Grabowski here, Mike.
hi, Ed. How are you? Good to hear from
Doing
you.
okay. Ken, can you take down the presentation, or you want to leave it up for some other questions?
There.
Okay. I have to share screen, right? Right.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Okay, you see that?
Oh,
German
yeah,
Post in
great.
Jaffa.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
about that?
1912. Yeah,
1912.
1912. Yep.
Okay, but of
Yep.
course, I'm collecting philately and international mail order fraud. And this is to Professor A. Victor Segno, the great spiritualist who sold success waves. It's from the German office in Jaffa at the proper 2 piaster, I guess, rate.
That's right.
Not piaster. Yeah, is it
Yeah.
piaster? Yeah,
Yeah, 1 piastra letter and 1 piastra registration.
registration. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, in your German section, there is another cover with a 40 Pfennig German stamp on it, also to Professor Segno, that I chased to 270 euros on eBay, and I didn't get it. And then it appeared in a small German auction at 500 euros, and it didn't sell. And then it reappeared in that same auction at 750 euros, and it still didn't sell. And I don't know what happened to it since. So it had some technical differences that would have brought it into my collection. But this shows that even Professor Segno, with his success waves, made it to Palestine. So I thought you'd like that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad you shared it. And I think it really corroborates what I was saying, and that is the capitulation treaties allowed a lot of the European Christian nations to maintain operations in the Holy Land. Of course, today's topic was related to France and its operations, but I'm really glad you showed us this, because there was a real lot of stuff going on during all these eras, and even as of today, with a presence with all the major religions in that area. And I just found it fascinating over my collecting career, how much France played a role. And I was really, Ken, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share this long history of military and commercial and religious and consulate and diplomatic mail going on in that particular part of the world.
Yep. Anybody else? If not, I am going to turn off the recording.